Hollywood is a place where stars are accustomed to shining not only on screens, but also in real life. But one night made Keanu Reeves not just a favorite of the audience, but a real hero. A fire that broke out in an old apartment building could have claimed the life of an elderly woman, if not for one person who could not pass by. This was not a scene from an action movie. It was a reality where kindness and courage were crucial. The Hollywood night was calm until the sky lit up with fire. Flames were bursting from the windows of an old three-story building that stood among the city's narrow streets. The smoke rose high, filling the air with a pungent odor that made people cover their faces. Residents of neighboring houses ran outside, watching the tragedy unfold before their eyes. Keanu Reeves was driving home after a day of filming when a light caught his eye. At first he thought it was just another special effect on the set, but quickly realized it was real. He turned to a narrow street where people were standing in confusion, not knowing what to do. Some were calling the emergency services, while others just watched the fire devour the old building. Somewhere on the second floor, behind a soot-stained window, a figure appeared. A woman, old and weak, was stretching out her hand as if seeking rescue. The smoke was thickening, and her strength was diminishing. She did not scream, only moved helplessly, trying to find a way out. Time was running out. The fire was spreading, devouring the wooden beams, floor, and walls. The heat could be felt even outside, and the crackling of the flames mingled with the shouts of passers-by. A few more minutes, and the building could collapse. People were waiting for firefighters, but for the elderly woman, this time could have been fatal. Keanu realized that he could not stand by. His eyes caught sight of an emergency entrance, a door that had not yet been engulfed in flames. He ran there while the others stayed at a safe distance, hoping someone else would take charge. He did not wait for heroic words or approval. He just acted. He approached the door, which turned out to be locked. After a quick look around, he found a piece of pipe and hit the lock with force. The lock cracked, the door opened, and he stepped inside, where he was immediately overwhelmed by a wave of heat. Smoke filled the corridors, and every breath became painful. His eyes were watering, but he walked forward, guided by the faint light that made its way through the blackness. Already on the stairs, he felt the wooden beams under his feet begin to weaken. Every step seemed like a risk. The flames were spreading too fast. He had to act immediately. He concentrated on the task at hand, getting to the room where the woman was. His movements were quick, although his body was already protesting the strain. He found the room from which he could see the old woman outside the window. She was sitting on the floor with her arms around her head. Obviously, she was already short of breath. There was very little time left. He picked her up, she was as light as a feather, and began to make his way back. The way back became even more difficult because the fire had already filled the stairwell. The safest way out was through the window. He went to it and opened it, assessing the height. Firefighters were already standing below, unfolding a tarpaulin tent. There were no more options. He held his grandmother tightly to him and jumped. The fall was short but intense. He managed to cushion the impact by holding the woman so that she did not get hurt. His own body took the brunt of the impact, but it didn't matter. The main thing was that she was safe. The doctors immediately began to treat the victim. Keanu was sitting next to her, feeling his heart gradually come to life after a frantic rhythm. He could still feel the smoke in his lungs, but he didn't mind. He had done what he had to do. The house from which Keanu had just carried the elderly woman was still burning, engulfed in flames that were ruthlessly consuming everything in its path. The people on the street watching were still stunned by what had just happened. The flashing red and blue lights of fire trucks flashed in the darkness of the night, and thick black smoke rose up, covering the starry sky. The smell of burning penetrated every pore, mixing with the cold night air. The elderly woman Keanu rescued was quickly transferred to an ambulance. The doctors were already checking her condition, giving her an oxygen mask to help her regain her breath after inhaling the toxic smoke. She was trembling. Her hands were still tense from the fear she had experienced, but her eyes showed gratitude. She weakly squeezed the hand of one of the medics, trying to say something, but her voice was not enough. Meanwhile, Keanu stood nearby, breathing heavily, trying to regain consciousness. His clothes were covered in soot, and he had smoke marks on his face. He hadn't fully realized what had just happened, but his mind was racing with thoughts that he had made the right choice. This was not a scene from a movie. This was reality, where the risk was real. The firefighters began to extinguish the fire, directing powerful jets of water at the building that was engulfed in flames. The cracking sound of wood collapsing inside broke the silence of the night. Some of the residents stood by, hugging each other as they watched their homes disappear in flames. They had lost almost everything, but the only thing that mattered now was that everyone who had been rescued was alive. Keanu walked closer to the ambulance to make sure the woman was okay. She was lying on a stretcher, her breathing steadier, but weakness still gripped her body. The paramedics assured her that she would be fine and that she needed to be taken to the hospital for further observation. When the ambulance doors closed and it started to move, Keanu watched her for a few minutes. He wasn't looking for praise. He wasn't looking for cameras or interviews. For him, it was just something that needed to be done. He looked around the scene once more, saw the fire gradually succumb to the firefighters' onslaught, and finally took a deep breath, feeling the fatigue that had finally caught up with him. The night went on, but this event left a mark in the hearts of those who witnessed it. No one knew what would happen next, but they all understood one thing. Kindness and courage can appear where they are least expected. Keanu stayed at the scene for a while longer, watching the firefighters finish their work. The building, once home to dozens of people, now looked like a charred skeleton with the remnants of fire poking through. Some residents were crying, while others looked on in silence, realizing that nothing could be brought back. When he finally decided to move, his legs were heavy, as if they were made of stone. He could feel the adrenaline slowly leaving his body, leaving behind the fatigue that had accumulated over the course of the evening. The streets were empty, except for a few emergency vehicles that remained in place to control the situation. He did not tell anyone what he had done that night. He didn't post on social media or comment to journalists. However, the next day, the story of the unknown hero who saved the woman from the burning house was already spreading throughout the city. People began to recall seeing a familiar face in the crowd, and it soon became clear that it was him. When journalists approached him for comment, he shrugged his shoulders and said that he had done what anyone would have done in his position. But not everyone would have done the same. Not everyone would have had the courage to throw themselves into the fire, risking their own lives. His act was an example of how true kindness doesn't need applause. It simply exists where it is most needed. A few days later, he received a letter. It was a thank you note from the woman he had saved. She wrote that he had given her back the chance to live her life, that she would never be able to express all the words of gratitude she would like to say. Her words were full of sincerity and deep respect. Keanu smiled when he read the letter. He wasn't looking for an award. He wasn't looking for gratitude. He just did what he thought was right. And that was enough. A few days passed after the night Keanu rescued an elderly woman from a burning house. Life in the city went on, but for the residents of that street, the event remained deeply etched in their memories. People were discussing how the unknown hero rushed into the heart of hell without hesitation. Those who recognized Keanu shared his act on social media, and the story quickly gained popularity. Despite this, the actor himself did not want to be publicized. He believed that he had only done what he had to do. But gratitude and letters from strangers began to arrive at his home. People wrote about how this act inspired them, how it made them think that true kindness exists not only in movies. Some even told their own stories about moments when they had to choose between indifference and help. Keanu read each letter, turning the pages thoughtfully. Every word mattered. Every thank you left a mark in his heart. He had never sought recognition, but this response from strangers made him feel something special, a deep connection with those who valued kindness as much as he did. At the same time, he did not forget about the woman he saved. Doctors reported that she was recovering quickly from the shock she had experienced. Keanu felt the need to visit her, to make sure she was really okay. So he took the time to go to the hospital. When he walked into the room, she was already sitting on the bed, looking better than she had that night. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. She couldn't hold back her tears, not from fear, but from sincere gratitude. Keanu didn't say much, just asked her how she was feeling. She replied that thanks to him, she still had a chance to live. This meeting left a deep impression on him. He realized that sometimes small actions can change someone's life. He left the hospital with a light heart, knowing that he had done something meaningful. However, he did not realize that this story would continue. After the meeting at the hospital, Keanu returned to his normal routine, but the feeling that this story was not yet over never left him. As the days went by, he worked on new projects, but the thought of the woman he had saved would occasionally pop into his mind. Her look of gratitude was deeply imprinted on him. A few weeks later, he received unexpected news. One of the doctors who took care of the woman contacted him with a request. She wanted to see her savior again. Keanu didn't hesitate long and decided to visit her again. When he arrived at the hospital, he was met by nurses who already knew about his heroic deed. With smiles, they showed him to the room where the elderly woman was lying. A warm smile appeared on her face when he entered. She looked much better, although her eyes betrayed that the fear she had experienced had not yet receded. The woman handed him a small letter, an old one, yellowed by time. She said it was her memories of her past, written for the man who had given her a second chance. He took the letter and later, when he returned home, opened it. He was struck by the words written on the paper. It was the story of her life. Difficult, filled with losses, but at the same time imbued with hope. She talked about the war, about fleeing her hometown, about losing her family. She described how she lived alone for many years, how she learned to find joy in simple things, how she never lost faith in human kindness. She wrote about how that night changed her, how her heart sank with fear as the flames surrounded her room, and how she was ready to say goodbye to her life. But then he appeared. Keanu reread these lines with a sense of deep respect. He realized that sometimes saving one person can mean more than it seems at first glance. This was not just a woman who was rescued. This was a person who had found the meaning of life again. He decided not to keep this story for himself. He started supporting her, helping her adapt to a new life after the tragedy. He helped her find a new place to live, helped her organize care, and did everything he could to make sure she never felt alone again. Over time, thanks to his support, she was able to find new friends and return to her favorite activities that once brought her joy. She started painting, gardening, and participating in activities for the elderly. She was no longer afraid to fall asleep, knowing that she had regained security in her life. This story was another reminder to Keanu of the power of human kindness. He knew that not everyone has the ability to become a hero on a large scale, but even one act can change another person's life forever. Time passed, but the story of that night did not disappear without a trace. For Keanu, it was not just an act, but a moment that changed him. He visited the elderly woman whenever he could, supported her, and helped her with her daily activities. For him, this became something more than just help. It was a symbol of humanity that he could not ignore. The press wrote about his act for a long time. Journalists tried to interview him, but he remained modest as always. He did not seek fame, did not seek popularity based on good deeds. It was important to him that the woman survived, that she was able to recover from the tragedy. This was his true reward. However, this story affected not only him. Many people began to wonder how they could help the elderly who were left without support. Volunteers created a charity fund dedicated to helping lonely old people. Keanu himself quietly supported this movement, donating money and personally participating in some events without publicizing it. The woman he rescued found new friends. She no longer felt lonely because people touched by her story began to come to her, bring her gifts, communicate, and help her. Not only did she feel like a part of society, but she began to help others. She became a symbol of rebirth, proof that there is hope even in the darkest moments of life. One day, She decided to organize a small event in her community, a meeting for the elderly where they could share their stories, talk about life, and receive emotional support. Keanu supported this initiative, but not as a celebrity, but as a regular friend. He helped with the preparations, attracted resources, and looked for people who could make the event unforgettable. When the day of the meeting came, the hall was filled with people. These were not just guests. They were people who had once felt lonely, but thanks to this story, they felt connected to society again. They listened to the woman's story, thanked Keanu for his kindness, and shared their own experiences. The atmosphere was warm, full of light and mutual support. At the end of the event, the woman addressed all those present. She spoke about how at the worst moment of her life, she no longer believed in salvation, but fate gave her a second chance. She thanked Keanu and everyone who did not leave her alone in her trouble. Her words touched everyone in the audience. After the event, he stayed with her for a long time, helping her clean up, drinking tea, and listening to her stories. She became not just a rescued person for him. She became a friend. It was something he did not expect, but it filled his heart with real warmth. This story was not just about being rescued from the fire. It was about human kindness, the power of support, and the fact that even one act can change many lives. And although Keanu never considered himself a hero, for everyone who witnessed this event, he will forever remain an example of true kindness and courage.